Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Natiravanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Shri Shri Vijay Gauranga Dayanitai Ki Jai Jai Shri Shri Vijay Gauranga Dayanitai Ki Jai. I'm sorry, sir? Yeah. Is the phone on? Okay, cool, thanks. Oh, no water, please. Thank you. Cool. Thank you for the offer. All right. Cool. Today we will be reading again from the Transcendental Diary, Travels with His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, October 1976 to November 1976, by Hari Saridas. When I observed, this is in Vrindavan, Sri Vrindavan Dham. They just found a chef for the temple, and he was hired. And when I observed that it was inconceivable for such karmis to even think of leaving home and family, Prabhupada laughed reflectively and nodded. Yes, he smiled. I also did not want to take sannyas. Of course, not for these things, but for another reason. But Prabhupada forced me to. He arranged things in such a way that without taking sannyas, I was always disturbed. I was dreaming. He would come and take me away and tell me I must take sannyas. And I was following him, but I was afraid. I did not want to take sannyas, but I was thinking, oh, it is Prabhupada's order. I must do it. That was one thing, he reflected gently, his features softening. I always had a sublime interest in Prabhupada's instructions. So Prabhupada is talking about his Guru Maharaj. Therefore, I am having some success. Prabhupada himself noted that. He said, this boy is very nice. He does not go away. He is keen to hear. It is always a wonderful privilege to share these intimate moments when Prabhupada, freed from the pressures of formality and management, confides a little of his personal relationship and service to his Guru Maharaj. Yudhishthir Das sent a 5-page progress report on the development of a property called New Raivataka, near Friendship in upstate New York. He has been there for over a year after spending 3 years in New Vrindavan. He explained that the Buffalo Temple had previously owned a farm which he went up there to manage, but it was later adjudged to be inadequate and sold. Because the temple didn't have the resources, they couldn't purchase a replacement, and so Yudhishthir, not willing to give up the effort to develop a farm community, persuaded his father-in-law to buy a 180-acre spread that he found at Friendship. So, I'll just say something about this. I used to live near Friendship in New York. I'm sorry, sir? 180 acre. Yeah, it's very big. But I used to live near Friendship. It's very small. Friendship is so small that I think there's one store when I lived there, and that's Friendship. It's just cow farming. and pasture land, and it's very cold in the wintertime. And it's property up there is inexpensive. He gave a glowing report of his year's endeavors and the state of the farm. Using only one team of oxen and one of horses, he has harvested 60 tons of hay, 90 bushels of potatoes, and 10 bushels of sweet corn. They have also invested in a maple syrup evaporation plant, which he hopes will yield 50 to 100 gallons of syrup worth between $150 and $1,300. Accompanying photos attested to the beauty of the property, which has its own natural gas well fueling, heating, cooking, hot water, and refrigeration. 3 ponds and 2 streams, 2 apple orchards, and a sugar maple grove, and about $10,000 worth of standing timber. There are also 2 farmhouses, a large hay barn, and about 35 cow stalls complete with all the equipment for milking and storage. Despite all this, he said that only he and his family were living there. He would like others to join them and turn the project into a fully Krishna-conscious community. But so far, no one else has come. Because the farm is in the name of his father-in-law who made the purchase, makes the monthly payments and covers all the running costs, devotees are reluctant to commit themselves. His father-in-law is willing to sell it to them at any time, however, and Yudhishthira feels that with 1 or 2 families there, they will be able to generate a sufficient income to buy the place and put it in the society's name. So his intent in writing was to seek Prabhupada's endorsement with the hope that this will attract other devotees to join them. We think that if you gave your written approval of this project, he wrote, it would serve to allay the doubts some devotees may have about the authenticity of our attempt. Your approval would encourage serious devotees to come here. And with a few steady families, we would soon be able to buy the farm and transfer it to ISKCON's name. We pray that you will be pleased with our honest attempt to render some small service at your lotus feet. But if you are not pleased, kindly chastise your servants. Prabhupada looked over the pictures and appreciated his efforts. However, while giving his encouragement, he did not want to be drawn into the managerial decision-making, preferring instead to leave it to the local leadership to decide. Please accept my blessings, he replied. I am in receipt of your letter dated the 13th of October 1976, along with photographs of your farm. It appears very nice. As far as the farm being authorized, you discuss with Kuladri and Kirtanananda Maharaj. Whatever they say, I agree. Kuladri is an experienced man, so you may organize things there, taking his advice. Please just work sincerely and Krishna will bless you. Would somebody like to say something?
Is there more after this?
Yes, sir. I mean, well, it's sort of like a stop. And then it goes on to talking about responsibilities in South Africa. So it's a good place to stop. But somebody would like to say something about these things?
Is the farm still existing?
I don't think so.
This farm never started.
Never, you know about this?
No, but this farm never started. I mean, I don't remember ever seeing any after this. And I never read anything about this after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never heard about a farm in Friendship, New York, and I was living 20 miles from there, roughly. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting here is Prabhupada always had a sublime interest in Prabhupada said he always had a sublime interest in his spiritual master's instructions. Therefore, I'm having some success, he says. That's really cool, I think, because that's what our philosophy is, that, having an interest in the instructions, for example, our institutional guru is Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, And he has given a lot of instructions about how we can live our lives, how we can establish Krishna consciousness in this world in different ways, according to time, places, and circumstances. And there are devotees who have an interest in that, and they have success, and they're always successful in somehow or other. Krishna is always looking out for them. So no matter what happens in Krishna consciousness, if we have some attachment for Srila Prabhupada's mission, then that will kind of like really be a saving grace. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Lord Chaitanya took sannyas and Santa Saraswati was pushing Prabhupada to sannyas. This looks like very important for success preaching.
I don't think that it's very important for successful preaching, personally. But according to time, place, and circumstance, this has been done to advance a cause. My personal opinion about this, and as far as I've read in scripture, I don't see objection from what I personally think. But the most important thing is that an individual grabs on, really attaches themselves to the instructions of the spiritual master. That's the most important thing. And the purpose of sannyas really is, so far as what I can understand, and anybody here willing to correct me, or add to what I'm going to say, is that the purpose of sannyas is that it establishes authority, on one hand. And now, I don't want to speculate why did Prabhupada, of course his guru told him to, and it was necessary for, also, I don't want to speculate on that, but you can see he took sannyas and then he went to the United States and he started preaching. So, but what's really required, in Prabhupada, so sannyas, what does it do? Is it establishes authority. Because people in the International Society of Krishna Consciousness and people that adhere to Vedic culture, they respect the order of sannyas. And when a sannyasi says something, people take it seriously, right? If somebody who's not a sannyasi, if they say something, individuals will respect it according to the according to the clout. There's a word people use, a reputation that the speaker has, right? So, for example, I don't have a lot of clout or reputation, but I can repeat what Prabhupada said. So I know that's good. But if I were to say something like, we should do this or do that or go here or go there, or, give an opinion, it wouldn't be taken with a lot of gravity, because, I'm not really... but then if I were to take sannyas, for example, which is not going to happen, probably in my whole life, but if it were to happen, right, hypothetically speaking, then people would take me seriously. They would, and when I walk into the room, you're supposed to bow down and pay obeisances at least when you see a sannyasi, at least one time in the day. And that commands respect. So that's how you actually are able to authority, how you establish authority. Because without an authority, people sometimes clamor and they kind of compete for authority. And then there's not really a good leadership. There's people going in different ways. There's a lot of this kind of like dissension, means conflict. But the order of sannyas establishes authority. Now, if you go outside of India, people don't generally understand that, because generally people don't adhere to this order of sannyas. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas because he wanted people to take him seriously. Because he knew that if he took sannyas, then people would take him seriously, because that was our culture. But that's not the culture in Western countries. Outside of India, outside of the Vedic hub, sphere of influence, the order of sannyas, so far as I'm aware, doesn't command a lot of respect. It's sort of unknown. But the order of sannyas also indicates that a person has given up family life. And family life is seen to be a hindrance in preaching. Because in addition to one's preaching obligations, one has to maintain their family. And maintaining a family isn't limited to monetary expenditure. Maintaining a family is a lot of actual emotional support. Anytime there's a partnership, it requires work from both persons in terms of maintaining the emotional and, affectionate bond between, and also the children. But when you take the order of sannyas, you say, I'm not going to do this. So I don't have to worry about that responsibility. I can focus all of my energy on preaching. And I so far as I'm aware, it's not necessary for preaching. An example in ISKCON is Prithu Prabhu and also this gentleman Ravindra Swarup Prabhu. They're both married and they both take responsibility in preaching. And they have success. Thank you. I'm not aware about...
He has a lot of disciples.
Yes, Chaitanya Chandra Prabhu. Also, I have a friend of mine, his name is Vijay Balade Prabhu. He's in Golokadam. I believe his guru is also a Grihastha. And he made... This is him, right. Big, so there are a lot of examples of persons who are family members, householders, and they're having big success in preaching. The only thing is necessary that I'm aware of, for preaching is you have to be, empowered by God, by Krishna, and which means empowered by spiritual authority. Thank you. Yeah, so there's no necessity for assuming the order of sannyas. I don't see how it's going to, if a person is confused in their mind and they're disturbed and they put on the dress of a sannyasi, that won't change much. If they chant an extra line in their Gayatri mantra, I'm not sure that's going to change much. If they're confused in the mind, wearing a different dress and carrying a stick, and people bowing down to you, it's not going to necessarily help. Does anybody wants to add to that? Or, yes?
There is actually in this age a very high amount of sannyasis who are just pretenders.
Where is it written?
I was reading it in the purport from Sri Prabhupada. He was writing that then they have illicit relationships with women and also just wearing the sannyas clothes for authority.
It seems like I've read somewhere that sometimes people assume the dress. Okay, assume the dress of a mendicant to solve economic problems, but I'm not sure exactly where I read that. But I've heard it. You would like to say something?
Especially some also when they're entering the rest, they can preach better.
Right. Maybe that's also helpful actually to be satisfying this need for.
More connected with the worldly affairs, so then you have more ability.
Right. So even actually, it could even maybe enhance the preaching. Would you like to say something about this?
Yeah, there's so many things to be said, but first of all, Lord Chaitanya took sannyas after this incident with the Agama Paduyas, the students who offended Lord Chaitanya because he was chanting Gopi, Gopi. And they said, who are you to chant Gopi, Gopi? What is this Gopi, Gopi? You should chant the Vedic mantras, to make actual advancement in spiritual life. So this is interesting that people are, I don't want to use to offend Shudras, but for the lack of a better word, people are Shudras in this world, meaning they're not so intelligent. People are not intelligent. They don't have, especially they don't have a spiritual intelligence. So when they see so Shudras or this lower, they only the stick speaks, because lower class of people who are the animal platform or like a basic platform, they need stick, meaning they need some authority, to, I know from the communist countries they always look for some leader, or he's a good leader, he's a heavy, So it's people need stick. So they think, otherwise they will think he's just like me. What does he know? I know better. So this, and therefore, when you're a sannyasi, then these standards I cannot reach. So therefore, he is an authority. It's just because people are just shudras, and this is what Lord Chaitanya taught. He said they're offending me, and I came here to deliver them, and therefore I should take sannyas. So meaning the sannyas, one takes sannyas to increase the preaching, not for some other reasons. If somebody takes sannyas for some other reason, then it's nice, but it's not as effective and it's not as pleasing to Guru and Krishna. So to take sannyas means to have some results, not just okay, I'm sannyasi now, I'm traveling now everywhere. And second thing I wanted to say is that in the West nowadays there's so many Indians, and everybody knows what sannyasa is. Therefore, taking the sannyasa ISKCON is valuable in that sense because there's so many Indians, and Indians, even if they don't join or whatever, they will give donations. So sannyasa is like a magnet for donations in a positive sense. It could be also negative sense, but it's a magnet for donation. You know, I can testify that.
Okay.
As a grihasta, it's very difficult to get donations. I'm a grihasta because they think this guy is just like me. But if you come as a sannyasi, you get so much donation. So therefore, in that sense, it's very valuable. If you have a project, if you have things to accomplish, you can just walk in the room and automatically people say, oh, here's donation, here's what can I do for you. So I think sannyasa is very, very, very necessary. Very, very necessary.
No, very nice.
So there you have, this is good, yeah.
I'm joking. Sannyasa is very nice.
And the second thing, what I wanted to say, if you don't mind.
No, please, I want to hear actually.
About the land, this was more interesting topic to me. The Prabhupada, first of all, devotees didn't want to go to other people's land. This was not registered in ISKCON. This is an interesting point to me. The devotees, therefore association of devotees is very important. The devotees know, okay, this is not registered in ISKCON. I don't want to work for somebody's. And this happened to us here in Germany some years ago. There was a similar story, and somebody just went, many devotees went and did services, and then later on this person took this property. So this service was kind of in vain. Not in vain, it's for Krishna, but it's... So this is the, we have to learn from this. And the Prabhupada also did not want to get involved because he didn't want to deal with this, because it's a complex situation. And the Prabhupada was not immediately saying, yeah, this is a wonderful idea, do it. Because it was tainted with some material things. It's not their property. Okay, you can move to the property, and after some time he will sell it. If he would just say, I want to give this property for free as a donation, can you take it, Prabhupada? I'm sure Prabhupada will even go himself there. But Prabhupada was not into it because it was not. So he said, okay, ask them because they're also experts. Ask them, Ladri and Ketananda. And that Prabhupada also, the point is that Prabhupada was very, very interested in having land, in having properties, and buying temples and everything, but if he saw it's not clear, he immediately backed it off. So this is also for the future manager or current managers to know, if something is like not clear, we should not. What is that? If there's something, better not do it. Or
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
If you have doubts,
if you
have doubts, better not do it because it will be wrong.
Yeah, if you have some doubt, then it means no.
So we should always
If you're not sure, then no. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah. I was also reading, I think recently, that there was maybe it was from this Transcendental Diary even, that they were going to buy some land and then the people wanted to have some kind of control. It was going to be used as a way to control what had happened or somehow like that, something like that. Also, it was not clear. Right. Okay. There's anything else? Yes, sir?
I think we will read it to the Bible, so I will leave it.
Okay.
I already read the verse.
All right. Now we read from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we read from the 5th canto, The Creative Impetus, Chapter 1, The Activities of Maharaj Priyavrata, verse number 36. Sa evam aparimita bala parakrama ekada tu devarshi charananu sayananu patita guna visarga sangsargena nirvritam ivatmanang manyamana atma nirveda idam aha. Saha, he, Maharaj Priyavrata, evam, thus, aparimita, unparalleled, bala, strength, parakramaha, whose influence, ekada, once upon a time, tu, then, Devarishi, of the great saint Narada, Charana Anusuyana, Anushayana, right, surrendering unto the lotus feet, Anu, thereafter, Patita, fallen down, Guna Visarga, with material affairs, created by the three modes of material nature. Sangsargena, by connection. Anirvritam, not satisfied. Eva, like. Atmanam, himself. Manyamanaha, thinking like that. Atma, self. Nirvedaha, possessing renunciation. Idam, this. Aha, said. Translation. While enjoying his material opulences with full strength and influence, Maharaj Priyavrata once began to consider that although he had fully surrendered to the great Saint Narada and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness, he had somehow become again entangled in material activities. Thus his mind now became restless, and he began to speak in a spirit of renunciation. Purport. In Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 5th chapter, verse 17, it is said, Jagdva sadharmang charanambujang harer bhajan apakvota patetato yadi yatrakva va bhadram abhut amushaking kovarta apto bhajatang svadhamataha. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage, yet there is no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. If one, somehow or other, comes to the shelter of a great Vaishnava, takes to Krishna consciousness because of sentiment or realization, but in course of time falls down because of immature understanding, he is not actually fallen, for his having engaged in Krishna consciousness is a permanent asset. If one falls down, therefore, his progress might be checked for a certain time, but it will again become manifest at an opportune moment. Although Priyavrata Maharaj was serving according to the instructions of Narada Muni, meant for going back home, back to Godhead, he returned to material affairs at the request of his father. In due course of time, however, his consciousness for serving Krishna reawakened by the grace of his spiritual master, Narada. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 41, Suchinang Srimatang Gehe Yoga Bhrashto Bijayate. One who falls down from the process of Bhakti Yoga is again offered the opulence of the demigods, and after enjoying such material opulence, he is given a chance to take birth in a noble family of a pure Brahmana or in a rich family, to be given the chance to revive his Krishna consciousness. This actually happened in the life of Priyavrata. He is a most glorious example of this truth. In due course of time, he no longer wanted to enjoy his material opulences and his wife, kingdom, and sons. Instead, he wanted to renounce them all. Therefore, after having described the material opulences of Maharaj Priyavrata, Shukadev Goswami in this verse describes his tendency for renunciation. The words Devarshi Charananusayana indicate that Maharaj Priyavrata, having fully surrendered to the great sage Devarishi Narada, was strictly following all the devotional processes and regulative principles under his direction. In regard to strictly following the regulative principles, Srila Viswanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Dandavat pranangs tan anupatitaha. Being immediately offering obeisances, dandavat, under the spiritual master, and by immediately offering obeisances, dandavat, under the spiritual master, and by strictly following his directions, the student becomes advanced. Maharaj Priyavrata was doing all these things regularly. As long as one is in the material world, he has to be under the influence of the modes of material nature, guna visarga. It is not that Maharaj Priyavrata was freed from material influence, because he possessed all material opulences. In this material world, both the very poor man and the very rich man are under material influences. For both wealth and poverty are creations of the modes of material nature. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 27, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasaha. According to the modes of material nature we acquire, the material nature gives us facility for material enjoyment. While enjoying his material opulences with full strength and influence, Maharaj Priyavrata once began to consider that although he had fully surrendered to the great saint Narada and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness, he had somehow become again entangled in material activities. Thus his mind now became restless, and he began to speak in a spirit of renunciation. Okay. So this last paragraph is very nice, interesting paragraph. Because sometimes people think that poor people are renouncing material wealth, right, is actually a spiritual activity, to renounce material wealth and to live and to assume a vow of poverty. But according to this commentary in the Srimad Bhagavatam, both poverty and wealth are influences of the material nature. even if a person voluntarily accepts poverty. And also, right, okay, and that's because as conditioned souls, we are under the influence of the material modes of nature that we have acquired from our previous activities and that we continue to cultivate even in this body. And until we are free from those material modes of nature, then we are still working, even though engaged in devotional service, we are still being controlled by the modes of nature. And the modes of nature are conditioning us, 3 types of conditioning: modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So it behooves an individual to understand how they are conditioned by the modes of material nature. The mode of goodness conditions an individual to happiness. So even though an individual is always happy and satisfied, it does not mean that they are making spiritual advancement, or it does not mean that they are beyond the modes of material nature. Because a person who is influenced by the mode of goodness has a propensity to think themselves better than others. Recently we were reading about, you were giving a lecture and talking about this Sanskrit scholarship and how it might be dangerous in spiritual life. And there are examples of people who studied Sanskrit, and it actually led to their falling away from Krishna consciousness. And the understanding is that they became puffed up and assumed that they knew better than the spiritual master. So with their knowledge, they became proud. And then they started to criticize. So this is what happens in the mode of goodness. If a person becomes situated in the mode of goodness, they are conditioned by happiness. And because of this conditioning and knowledge, because of the knowledge they have, they think themselves better than others. So that actually is called arrogance, to think oneself better than others. And for a person in the mode of goodness, it causes them to fall down into the mode of passion. Because as soon as they start to see themselves, or ignorance, because by seeing themselves as better than others, they may engage in criticism of other people, and also they begin to compete with people who they see as their contemporaries, equals in some respect. And competition is not an engagement of an individual who is on the spiritual path, because people on the spiritual path are too busy researching the absolute truth to engage in competing with other devotees or other personalities, or even institutions for that matter. Persons who are conditioned by the mode of passion, they're very resourceful, but they work, they work very hard to enjoy. They have a propensity for enjoyment, a very strong desire to enjoy. And material enjoyment isn't only taking place on the level of the gross bodily senses. So when we think about material enjoyment, we oftentimes consider enjoyment on the gross bodily senses, like enjoyment with the sense of touch, the sense of taste, the sense of hearing, enjoying to do something, the sense of working, enjoying traveling, procreation, all these things. But these gross bodily senses, material enjoyment is not only taking place there. Material enjoyment also takes place on a subtle level, because there are subtle senses. So material enjoyment also takes place in prestige. Prestige is like having a title that other people respect, and earning the respect of others, earning it or getting it without earning it, either way, that respect that we receive from other people for our accomplishments or our titles, it can be a form of enjoyment. And then there's adoration, to be adored by others. To be adored by others because somehow we have performed some activity or we have some material qualification that is unique and that earns us the adoration of other personalities in our association. And distinction, being different from others, being, different in any way, being very, very poor and fallen. This is also a form of distinction. When we distinguish ourselves by our disqualification, so in other words, in an attempt to be humble, we may actually be expressing our pride, and in an effort to secure the adoration of other persons. So this pride, this subtle enjoyment, is very pervasive and it's hard to avoid. Even if we try to avoid it, because perhaps we are averse to it, we are somehow also attached to it, and it expresses itself in our activities. And then persons who are in the mode of ignorance, they are, become angry very easily. They express their anger. Of course, this is in the mode of passion and ignorance. But they are unclean. They use foul language. And somehow or other, in spite of all of their faults, they still think that they know what is going on. They're very proud. There's an expression in English, it's called the proud pauper. A person who is very poor but very proud. And it is somehow materially understood that a person who is poor has been unsuccessful. So even a person who is very poor and unsuccessful can become very proud. But in Krishna consciousness, of course, we want to try to move beyond these three modes of material nature. And the only way to do that is by engaging fully in devotional service. And devotional service, I was reading what's very interesting. I was reading the Bhagavatam. I'll just share this with you quickly. The first paragraph of the first chapter, the first verse in the Bhagavatam, is completely dedicated to establishing Krishna as a supreme and original personality of Godhead and substantiating that. And Srila Prabhupada substantiates it using Jiva Goswami, the Samavedas, the Brahma Samhita. So it's kind of a repetition of Krishna being the son of Vasudeva. Vasudeva is meaning the son of Vasudeva. So this Krishna consciousness really begins with faith. And so faith in Krishna consciousness is a very we like to think that, I like to think that I have faith in Krishna consciousness because I'm here, I'm living in the temple, I'm practicing, I'm chanting. But in the next paragraph, it says that Krishna is the cause of all causes. But even though I have faith in Krishna consciousness, I become disturbed by persons who create an event that disturbs me, whatever that may be. And that indicates that I don't have full faith in Krishna consciousness. But until we have, because I don't see that event, which was a disturbance for me, was caused actually by Krishna, because He is the cause of all causes. So that indicates that I don't really have full faith in Krishna consciousness, or Krishna. Because if I did, then I would see that as such. And in order to move beyond the modes of material nature, we have to have this kind of full faith, because it requires a full engagement of the mind and the senses in Krishna consciousness all the time. And when it says, Mangchayo Vyabhicharena, right, this verse, it says, and does not fall down under any circumstance. Well, that can be understood in different perspectives. So, one perspective is according to this purport. For example, if a person has a fall down, even though having engaged in Krishna consciousness, if they experience some difficulty in their performance and they fall down, then it is not a loss for them. And it's not really considered, Prabhupada says, it's not actually, if one falls down, therefore, it says, because of an immature understanding, he's not actually fallen. And why is that? Well, it's because the person is properly situated in their determination. That's in the Bhagavad Gita. But his progress might be checked for a certain time, but it will not become again manifest at another opportune moment. So there's a kind of fall down, there's a very gross fall down, like in going from a sannyasi to a householder. That is considered like a fall down. But of course, it's not a complete fall down. It's just a temporary check of devotional service. But also, every time the mind is distracted when we're chanting, that's also a fall down. That's falling down. So that's another perspective. Every time that we stop, we look away from our service, that's also a fall down. Because the mind has engaged again in the material modes of nature, trying to find some happiness there. The mind is seeking happiness, just like a child wants a toy to play with. But the problem is that we don't have in an immature stage, the actor, right, the aspiring devotee, lacks the necessary faith to commit their mind to Krishna consciousness, which means being conscious of Krishna, remembering Krishna, manmana bhavamad bhakto, always chanting the glories of the Lord, bowing down, always somehow engaging the mind, always in Krishna consciousness. Even when we engage in service, it doesn't mean that we are spacing out about something. We can be remembering Krishna at that time also, and that is called devotional service. Because when you perform an activity with devotion, you remember, as a natural consequence, the object of devotion, or the object of service. That is a natural consequence. So falling down actually is probably something that a lot of us do often throughout the day. And it doesn't mean that we're actually meditating on sex life all of a sudden. Anytime we become distracted from Krishna in our mind, anytime we become distracted from Krishna in our thoughts, in our chanting, in our reading, in our pujari service, during Mangal Arti, what is this person chanting that way? I don't like this way of melody, or so many things can be distracting. And anytime that happens, that is called falling down. Because now you're not on the path, you're not on this platform anymore. You may have been engaged fully with your mind in remembering the form of the Lord, in remembering the lotus feet of the spiritual master. You may be taking shelter there by following those instructions in adhering to this process of Krishna consciousness. But as soon as the mind is deviated and you start thinking and enjoying spirit, look at how much I've done. Look, I washed all the dishes. Doesn't it look so clean? Then it's like you have fallen down. And then that means that you're again under the influence of the three modes of material nature. And we have to get free from this influence. That's like paramount. It's very important. So I'm sure there's some more here. Let's see. And this is also a nice verse here, because we were just talking about people that were householders and they're engaged in preaching Krishna consciousness. So it says here that Priyavrata Maharaj was a householder, but even as a householder, he was strictly following the instructions of Narada Muni. And as a householder, he had so much opportunity to be distracted by opulences. And a wife, and a kingdom, and children. But still, because he was following the instructions of his spiritual master, he was still making spiritual progress. He was still making spiritual advancement. And we can understand also by the way he managed things, he was managing very nicely. It wasn't like the whole world went down. Because if he had been in illusion, his management would have had poor results. Because he would have been distracted by the material enjoyment, and he would have become perhaps greedy or selfish and absorbed only in wanting to engage his material senses in sense gratification. So if we enter into householder life, or if we acquire by design or accident, of course everything is by design, right? Cause of all causes. Sudden material opulences, then we shouldn't think that suddenly I'm the enjoyer. Look, let me enjoy, I can't wait to do something, be a controller now. Finally I have some resources to control with. Because that means again we have fallen down into the modes of material nature. Even if before we were engaged in remembering Krishna, having a nice sadhana, engaging in our service, whatever it may be, if suddenly by some material opulence we become distracted, then that is like we have fallen down again, even if we don't break the regulative principles of spiritual life. So we should remember all the time to adhere very closely and always depend upon the instructions of the spiritual master for how we can make our way through life without becoming distracted by the influence of the modes of nature, whether we are poor or wealthy, because both are influences of the modes of nature. It's very easy as a poor person to become distracted by the influence of the modes of nature, which I've described already. There's pride and there's these whips, right? The mind, the thirst and the hunger. There's a sense of enjoyment. Even enjoying being poor can be also enjoying. People enjoy that rasa, the attention they get from others because of their poor condition. So even being poverty-stricken is, obviously by the purport and by a lot of practical examples, is an influence of the modes of nature. And people can fall into the trap of wanting to enjoy and wanting to control others, manipulate them, leveraging their poverty. It's 8:45. And I would like to ask if there are any questions or comments. Okay. Nothing is there? Garantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.